Good friend and long-time producer Ben Cavey suggests to me that it might be fun to do a chat show complete with guests at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival with my father, Michael Whitehall. My father is a very amusing man. He was an agent to some of the country's finest actors, but has never appeared on stage himself. But, in a moment of weakness, I mentioned the idea to him, and he says as long as he can stay in a hotel that's separate from whatever squalid bedsit I'm renting for the month, he will do it. Oh, and then sends a very long email to Ben about the terms of the deal he'd be getting. Agents, eh? In the run-up to the festival, booking the show becomes a nightmare. Every guest I suggest is vetoed by my father on account of them being low grade or too down market. When I mention Jimmy Carr, he simply roars with laughter and then says no. He eventually insists that he will only travel up to the festival if we book Simon Cowell. I tell him that I think it's highly unlikely that we get him as he's busy doing the X Factor. A lengthy rant about the death of culture in this country follows, and I am asked whether I have ever even heard of the RSC. I realise that I've misheard him and that he actually said Simon Callow, who is up at the Fringe doing some random play. Simon Callow agrees to do it. The show goes ahead. Basically, if you think this book's shit, you can blame Simon Callow. Backchat opens and is pretty well received, although it's not quite as fun as my producer made out. A long 2 weeks of my father telling me off for being unprofessional, accusing me every day of having a hangover, and constantly reminding me that no matter how hard I tried, I would never be as good an interviewer as Mike Glaspell. He also spends a lot of the show trying to flog a memoir he has written. I'm not going to mention the title of the memoir here, as it will only give him the publicity he so desperately craves. When I ask him to stop promoting it, he claims I am jealous as I am illiterate and wouldn't have been able to write a book as good as his. One night, I let slip that I've actually been asked to write a book myself. It is a revelation that is met with utter derision. Penguin are accused of having let their standards slip, and I am told that it is my duty to literature to turn the offer down. By the way, we're still on stage when all of this is going on. The poor audience stuck in what is fast becoming a sort of middle-class Jeremy Kyle show. Even our guest that night, Miranda Hart, was a little perplexed, but that was mainly because my father had spent most of the interview prior to this asking her whether she was any relation of Tony Hart. I must make clear, the sole purpose of writing this book was not to show my father that all the money he'd, quote, wasted on my education to travel up and down the country telling jokes about my penis was not frittered away, and that I could achieve something, but it certainly was a factor. I then had to decide what type of book to write. A novel seemed way beyond my abilities, and the notion of anything autobiographical was ridiculous, as I'm 24 years old. I mean, all the great writers wait till they're at least 26. Ashley Cole, Jordan, Tila Tequila. I racked my brains for what I could write about. Was there a subject or person who interested me? A prevalent theme in all of my work? A key figure in my stand-up shows? The inspiration for everything I do? I made the call. It turned out Chris Akabusi already had a biography, so I decided I'd write about my father instead. So how did he manage to worm his way onto this ticket? Was I pushed or did I jump? Well, he is a very persuasive man, and he is married to an even more persuasive woman, my mother, who made it very clear that if I was going to write about him, he would have to have a right of reply. She applied a lot of pressure, and towards the end of last year, I called my dad and said, "Dad, do you want to write a book with me?" His response, "Yes, but only if my name appears above yours on the title. I am, after all, the only published author." But
the title of the book has been withheld for obvious reasons.
Was really just a bit of fun, I replied. What I want to write is a proper, in-depth insight into our relationship between a father and son, so much more than just a collection of funny stories. And hey, what have we ended up with? We have ended up with a book that I am proud to say is probably just a collection of funny stories. Writing this book has been totes amazeballs. By the way, I will be using the odd young person phrase like that throughout this book, just because I know how much it annoys my dad. Lol. We've both, in a sense, become each other's biographer. I've been able to find out more about the man I love the most in the world than I ever thought I would. In some cases, maybe a bit too much. To this end, I must apologise for the number of stories which end up with either my father or me without any clothes on. It seems nudity is a pretty prevalent theme in both of our lives. I also want to point out that although what you are about to listen to is written half and half, it is typed 100% by me, as my father hates computers, refuses to let me teach him how to use Word, and struggles with the interweb. It means I have had to transcribe every word of his as he dictates it from a notepad. This included early on in the process an attempt to read me the story of my own conception, which he thought would be a fitting way to start the book. He didn't tell me where the story was going, so I unwittingly started typing away, and then about 5 minutes in was horrified to realise what he was talking about. They are images that will haunt me for the rest of my days, and I am pleased to say it is a story that will not be appearing in this book, or hopefully any book, ever. I ended up doing what I do because of my father. He is the funniest man I know, and throughout my life has been the source and from time to time subject of much amusement. People say they have dads that are their best friends. I never thought of mine like that, as even my best friends I don't want to hang out with all the time, whereas I will never tire of my dad's company, even when he's getting on my tits. That said, the recording of this audiobook may be a bit of an ordeal. As you'll hear in this book, he is not a man who minces his words. In fact, mincing in general is something that I would never associate with Michael Whitehall. He is certainly a product of a different generation and has some questionable views about the world, especially towards Germans. And a couple of his accents are maybe a tad un-PC. But he is a loving father and a devoted friend to me. Take everything he says with a pinch of salt and everything I say with a pinch of grammar. That is the main thing I've learnt from writing this. My father was right. I am basically illiterate. Oh, and one final thing. The real force behind this book is not me or my father, it is my mother. She has been our referee, our editor, administrator, tea maker, the one who's told us which family members we can and cannot make jokes about, and she also types all those bits of my father's stories I can't bear to listen to. She is a saint, and by the end of this book you'll understand why. She's put up with us for over 2 decades. This book should really be called Him, Her and Me. I must also add that we're going to be recording all of the chapters together in the same room, so from time to time you might hear interjections.
Can we get on with this now? I mean, I'm having lunch at the Garrick today and I'm already running late.
Okay, fine. That's my father's voice, by the way.
Fine, we're getting on with it then.
Okay, we'll start.
Okay.
Well, go on then. Yours is the first chapter.
Oh, right, okay. Part 1, First Memories. Chapter 1, A Black Tie Affair. Jack's birthday, 7th July 1988, was a particularly auspicious date for me. Late fatherhood had been on my mind for most of my life. When I entered the wrong end of my 40s, my mother Nora was forever reminding me that I would make a wonderful father, but not if I left it too late. I know you're an agent and that all those actors you look after, or whatever you call it, are like your children. They certainly behave like children, and spoilt ones at that. But it isn't the same. You should think of yourself for once. I still don't understand why you muck about with them, anyway. They're only interested in themselves. If only you could get yourself a proper job. I wasn't quite sure what I was doing having this conversation at this point in my life with my 80-year-old mother. I was beginning to feel like Anthony Perkins in Psycho. By coincidence, a client of mine at the time.
Clunk, the first of many name drops you will hear in this book. Now, older readers, you might recognise a few of the names. Younger readers, you'll probably never have heard of any of them. Maybe you could make fun of it by playing a name drop drinking game. 1 measure for every time he does it, 2 measures if you've heard of the person, and if it's Peter Bowles, finish your drink.
It would be nice if you could just keep quiet. This is my chapter, okay?
All right.
Picasso fathered a child when he was 82, said Nora, so there's no reason why you shouldn't. Nora loved quoting Picasso at me endlessly, drawing comparisons between the Spanish artist and myself, despite the fact that in this anecdote he was twice my age. I'd always dreamt of having children someday, and I couldn't quite believe it when it finally happened. I was hugely proud of Hilary for giving me such an amazing baby boy, and so proud of him too. I quickly became an older father bore and have remained one ever since. Peter Saunders delivered Jack at the Portland hospital wearing a dinner jacket, not at our insistence, but because he was on his way to a gynecological dinner. "Do you want to put on some gloves and help?" he asked me. For the money I was paying him, I thought he could do it on his own, so I declined his invitation. A face peered round the door of Hilary's room. "Any news?" asked Nigel. It was my client, the actor Nigel Havers.
Clunk. All right, I'll stop doing it now.
I'd called him earlier and mentioned Hilary was coming to the Boyle, though to be honest I hadn't expected him to appear quite so quickly. The nurse on the front desk was in such a flutter at seeing Nigel, of Passage to India fame,
a.k.a. the posh man from Coronation Street and I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here,
that she ushered him straight to the delivery room. By coincidence, he was also wearing a dinner jacket. Looking back, the whole scene had suddenly become very Downton Abbey.
Right, how and why was Nigel Havers just allowed to wander into the delivery room? I mean, I know it was the 80s, but it's a bit suspect. Also, why was he so desperate to be there in the first place? Isn't the birth meant to be a kind of family-only affair? It's a bit weird.
Yeah, OK, can we just get on now? "Are you on your way somewhere?" I asked Nigel Havers. "No, actually, when you rang, I was trying on an old dinner jacket I'd bought from Piero de Monzi in Chelsea years ago to see if it still fitted, so I thought I'd just come straight over." "Loved you in Chariots of Fire, by the way," said Peter Saunders, mid-delivery. "Did you do all your own hurdling? Care to help?" Peter offered Nigel some gloves as Jack's head started to protrude from Hilary's nether regions.
What? Is that within BMA guidelines? That you're allowed to offer anyone that just happens to walk into the room a go at delivering a baby?
No, of course not. "No, I'm fine, thanks, old boy," said Nigel. "As far as I can see, you seem to be doing jolly well." And he was, producing a very handsome baby weighing 7 pounds and 14.5 ounces. "My wife's going to kill me," said Peter as he was clearing up the debris. "I've got blood all over my dress shirt, and it was brand new. I should have worn an apron, but I always think those things make me look like a pathologist." As Peter departed, Hilary handed me Jack. Nigel and I headed off on a lap of honour and left Hilary to be tidied up. While I went to the loo, Nigel struck up a conversation with a dowager and her expectant daughter, who were standing outside their room. We were back in Downton Abbey again. "What a beautiful baby, Mr. Havers," she said. "He looks so like you." "Thank you so much, but he's not actually my baby," said Nigel. "I'm just holding him while my friend goes to the loo." "Left holding the baby, eh?" gushed the toothy daughter. "Quite," said Nigel, as I returned to join the party. It is true that the baby Jack did bear a striking resemblance to Nigel, and what with my friend's reputation as a bit of a ladies' man, I made a mental note to double-check with him later, just in case there was anything he wanted to tell me.
Oh my God, Nigel Havers is my real dad.
"Have you seen that poor baby over there?" said the dowager. "Why, what's wrong with it?" asked the daughter. "Oh, the poor little mite's got the most terrible dark rash across its face and over its tiny little hands, too." "Mummy, don't be ridiculous. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a black baby," she replied. "What?" shrieked the dowager. "At the Portland?"
Wow.
While Nigel and I had been showing off Jack, another two of my clients, Richard Griffiths and Leslie Phillips,
Clunk. Triple clunk.
had phoned the hospital and been put through to Hilary. Leslie had called reverse charges, saying that he was in someone else's house, but Hilary was sure she'd heard his wife in the background, muttering and banging pots and pans around while she was cooking. Leslie always found a way to ring me reverse charges. It was business, so he thought the office, that is me, should pay for the call. "Have we heard back from the BBC yet?" Leslie asked Hilary. "They promised they'd have a decision by today." "Actually, I've been rather tied up today, having a baby and things, but I'll get Michael to call you back." Ignoring Hilary's reference to a baby, Leslie said, "Would you tell Michael I really need this job? Maybe we should meet up and discuss what other things there are in the pipeline. Why don't I take him to lunch tomorrow?" I'd had several experiences of Leslie Phillips taking me to lunch, all resulting in me paying the bill. On more than one occasion, he'd pulled the dodgy credit card trick on me. This involved snatching the bill as soon as it hit the table and producing a card which the waiter would quickly return as it was out of date, in some cases by several years. So I didn't hurry to call him back. We returned Richard's call and asked if he would like to be Jack's godfather. "Delighted," he said. "I'll start putting together some money for a running away fund for him, which he can use when he's 18. You know, fast cars, loose women, Vegas, whatever." Forward planning was always one of Richard's strong suits. As Nigel had heard me offering Richard a godfather role, and bearing in mind the competitiveness of actors, I thought it would be churlish not to ask Nigel as well. "Of course, I'd love to," he replied. "Richard can look after Jack's finances, and I'll take care of his morals." I didn't think Nigel was the perfect casting to oversee Jack's moral welfare, but I knew he would provide him with plenty of entertainment over the years. "Isn't it a bit early to be arranging godparents?" said Hilary sleepily. The exertion of the last few hours was beginning to take its toll, and Jack was looking pretty snoozy too. "Well, we've had 9 months to think about it," I replied. "I noticed you didn't suggest Leslie Phillips," she mumbled. "I'd like Joe Williams as well to keep an eye on them." I agreed, as Joe Williams was an old school friend of Hilary's and one of the few I hadn't fallen out with.
The only one you hadn't fallen out with.
Oh, funny. With that decision made, Hilary and Jack fell asleep. "Let's go and wet the baby's head somewhere, shall we?" said Jack's newly appointed moral compass. By the time I got home, I was extremely drunk and very hungry. There was nothing appropriate in the fridge for immediate consumption, so I opted for a tin of corned beef from the larder.
My dad's not really a late-night kebab on the way home kind of a guy. Our larder is often stocked with things like corned beef, spam, other foodstuffs that evoke wartime rationing and allow my father to fondly remember the Blitz.
Total lies.
Sandwich spread.
Oh. As they do whenever I open any kind of tin, the key snapped off and I had to finish the job with a screwdriver. Drunk and desperate for food, I began scooping bits of meat out of the tin with my fingers until one of them attached itself to a razor-sharp piece of metal. Blood started spurting everywhere. It was like being back at the Portland. It was too late to call our local friendly doctor, and anyway I was slurring too much to be able to explain what had happened. So I decided to call Hilary. "Sorry, darling. Did I wake you up?" Hilary drowsily told me to put my finger under the cold tap and get some plasters from the bathroom. "I'm feeling faint. Loss of blood, probably," I said. "Too many vodka and tonics, probably," she replied. "I'm sure you'll live." "And how's my beautiful Jack?" I asked. "Asleep, just like I was," came the reply. "I think I'll go to bed now," I said. "To be honest, I'm feeling pretty drained. It's been quite an emotional day for me, sitting in the hospital waiting for Jack to be born, ringing all these people, having to talk to endless doctors and nurses, and keeping Nigel entertained, and of course having my first baby at the age of 48, and all the stress that entails. I think it's been pretty amazing for me, don't you? Hello? Hello? Silence on the other end of the phone, and then a gentle snore. Still on a high, I tried to bore several of my friends about the momentous arrival, but fortunately for them, they'd all gone to bed, so I headed off there too. The following morning, I was woken up by a cleaning lady, Mrs. James. Mrs. James was a native of Antigua.
Oh God, this could be dodgy territory.
But more lately of West Kensington. She was an active member of the local evangelist community, a brand of religion that I have given a wide berth during my life. I was raised a Catholic, and for me, church is about incense and guilt, not singing and holding hands. To my mind, a very small amount of happy clappiness goes a long, long way. Mrs. James loved a bit of melodrama, and this was a big moment for her. "Where is Miss Hilary?" she asked nervously.
Whoa.
"She's in hospital, Mr.
No,
Michael."
you can't do that voice.
What?
You can't do that voice.
Why?
That's definitely not allowed. You can't do an Antiguan voice. I know she was from Antigua. Listeners know that. You can't do a... That's
what
Jim
sort of
Davidson
voice shall I give her
territory.
then?
Well, not a chalky
You
voice.
don't remember how she spoke.
I don't remember how she spoke, but
She had a
I'm
very
sure
nice,
she did.
rich
Yes, I'm sure she
West
did. But
Indian voice.
No, as a 74-year-old white man, you can't do an impression of that
I'm
voice.
just going to use just a boring voice.
Not a boring voice. Just give her just a normal.
Maybe you'd like
lady's
to
voice. I'm not
voice her
doing
if
her
you know.
voice. I'm not doing her voice because I care about my career.
Okay, right. Well, we go back to Mrs. James Loved. Mrs. James loved a bit of melodrama, and this was a big moment for her. "Where is Miss Hilary?" she asked nervously. "She's in hospital, Mrs. James," I replied. "They have taken her, Mr. Michael?"
Right, you've gone back to the voice again.
Oh, sorry. Well, I took her, actually. Hilary had gone into hospital a few days early, as Peter Saunders was about to go off on holiday, and thought it was best to get the baby induced before he went. Peter, as you may have realised, was never one to let something like a birth get in the way of his social arrangements. "But they took her before her time, Mr. Whitehall. You shouldn't have allowed it. You must ask the Lord to watch over her and protect her from evil spirits," she wailed. "Just calm down, Mrs. James. She's fine, and so is the baby." "The baby has been born before its time. Have they taken it from her? Don't let them take it from her, Mr. Michael. The Lord will not forgive you." Mrs. James then started telling me about prematurely delivered devil babies in Dominica, where her aunt lived, and the dangers of brain damage if mothers were forced into hospital to have their babies too early. "Nobody forced Hilary to go to hospital," I said. "I took her there in the back of the Mercedes, and a nice nurse showed us up to her room when we arrived." "And is the baby a boy
Steady.
or a girl?" What?
Steady. That voice was creeping back in again.
"And is the baby a boy or a girl?" she asked. When I told her it was a boy, she said that God had sent me a boy so that he could take over the family when I died. It was important at my age to have a son, she told me. Little did I know what was in store for me. On my return home that evening, her worries about Jack seemed to have subsided, and she'd transferred her concerns to the world of domestic appliances. She'd left a note on the kitchen table saying, "Something bad with Hover," and I have to do the voice for this. "Something bad with Hover, it don't pick nothing."
Right, okay, there's better be her actual words. If you've just been making up your own version of Afro-Caribbean patois, that is too painful.
That's what the note
All
said.
right, fine. You're allowed that.
N-U-F-F-I-N,
Okay.
for nothing, and pick, P-I-K.
Right, that's your last. That's your last one. Another strike and you're out.
I replaced the Hoover bag, probably for the first time.
Bullshit.
Perhaps fatherhood was changing me. 2 days later, I was heading back to the Portland to collect mother and son. Hilary asked me to pick up a Moses basket at Peter Jones on the way. I held a cab in Sloane Square, carrying the basket and a couple of other packages. "Portland Hospital, please," I said to the cabbie. I was rather breathless as the parcels were heavier than I thought. "Present for the grandchild, Gov?" asked the driver. "My son, actually," I snapped. "They'll change your life, Gov. I've got 3 grandchildren, Harley, Dean and little Tiffany.
Definitely made up names.
They're all right little scamps, but they keep you young. I bet your daughter's as pleased as Punch." "My wife, actually," I replied. He completely ignored me, as only a cab driver can, and spent the rest of the journey giving me unwanted advice from one granddad to another. We finally arrived at the Portland, and I told the bossy-looking receptionist that I'd come to collect Hilary and Jack Whitehall. "Are you the father?" she asked in an accusatory way. "Well, I hope so," I replied. "I've just spent £85 on a bloody Moses basket."
Chapter 2. The Curse of Timmy Twinkle. Timmy Twinkle is a name that will forever strike fear into my heart. When I was growing up, Timmy Twinkle was my father's favourite children's entertainer. A favourite children's entertainer is an odd thing for a grown man to have, but there we go. No matter how much we protested...
What is it? What does this matter? It's matter.
I said no matter.
No, you just pronounce the words properly. I mean, the time we've spent on your education. No matter. It's no matter.
I said no matter.
Some of your young fans will be buying this and listening to your... and trying to get the right pronunciation of words.
Okay, fine. Right.
It's got a sort of educating kind of side to it.
Shh, please, my chapter. Shh. No matter how much we protested, happy?
Yeah.
No matter how much we protested, he was going to saddle us with him. Twinkle did not have the big, warm, cuddly grin of a Mr. Tumble, nor the cheeky, infectious energy of Dick and or Dom. In fact, he didn't look like a children's entertainer at all. With his old grey face, strands of straggly hair clinging to his slippery pate, and thick glasses masking a pair of cold, dead eyes, Timmy Twinkle resembled more than anything else a 1990s Tory MP. Perhaps that's why my dad liked him. His appearance was made all the more sinister by the bright blue magic cape and wacky patchwork adult pyjamas. Imagine John Gummer in fancy dress.
I don't know why you've brought John Gummer into it. No, there's nothing wrong with looking like John Selwyn Gummer. He was an excellent chairman of the Conservative Party during the Thatcher government, as you well know.
OK, I'm going to carry on now. He was, in short, not the kind of man you'd want anywhere near your children. Even the photograph he chose for his website looked like a mugshot you'd see printed in The Sun under a story about a woman who's gone missing. Everything about him was creepy. How might you think, then, did a truly terrifying man like this ever get any bookings? Well, this very flaw was the reason that my father had such a fondness for Timmy Twinkle. There was no carrot in his act, just stick, and a lot of stick at that.
Discipline is essential in the child entertainment business, and this was Twinkle's strong suit.
That I do not dispute. He presided over his young audience with all the joy and cuddliness of a guard in a Russian gulag. I recently watched a home video of Timmy Twinkle in his pomp at my 6th birthday. It was almost as creepy as an episode of Top of the Pops from the 70s. Twinkle started his act by warming up the crowd of obstreperous 6-year-olds with a bit of cheery banter with the front row.
Can I just stop you?
What?
What is that word you've just used? What did you call it?
Obstreperous.
No, it's not obstreperous. It's obstreperous.
Obstreperous.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Obstreperous.
I mean, not only do you not know how to pronounce the word properly, I would doubt very much that you know what it means anyway.
I know what it means.
Well,
I wrote it.
What does it mean, then?
Obstreperous.
Yeah.
What's, like... It's the opposite of streperous. Obstreperous.
Just carry on.
I thesaurussed it. It's a technique I've deployed many times in my own stand-up shows, although when I do it, I like to think I have a little more warmth than Twinkle. "Hello, what's your name?" Timmy asked my friend Natalia, a sweet, shy, blue-eyed little girl who was sucking her thumb. She didn't answer, and instead just tugged on his cape with a snotty hand. "Is someone a little shy?" Timmy asked. I don't doubt he was trying to sound friendly, but he sounded so menacing those words will still wake me from my nightmares. I'm convinced that they may yet be the last words I ever hear. "She's called Natalia," her brother William said.
A very, very difficult child, William.
Said with such enthusiasm that he flecked Timmy's glasses with spit. "Why are you wearing pyjamas? It's not bedtime, stupid," William continued, oblivious to the danger. "You're silly." As a heckle, it's not up there with the best, but it annoyed Timmy Twinkle. Twinkle, though, was a pro. He'd done the Putney Barnes suburban circuit for years, and he could handle this shit. "Thank you, William. If you'd just quieten down now," Timmy said, just about resisting the urge to make his first magic trick, sawing William in half for the crime of questioning his bizarre dress sense. By this time, the lack of content in Timmy's act meant that his easily distracted crowd were on their feet, wandering around the hall, talking amongst themselves and generally not paying much attention to Mr. Twinkle. "Sit down, children," he said firmly, trying to assert some control. This had no effect on the more boisterous children, which included William and myself. I was the birthday boy. I wasn't going to be told what to do on my special day, especially not by a man in pyjamas. We decided that we'd ignore Mr. Twinkle and carry on our game of who could spin round the quickest. Had he lost control this early on? The parents looked concerned. "Would you please sit down?" said Timmy slightly louder, but not loud enough to have an effect. "Sit down!" he bellowed, suddenly at the top of his voice, hurling his wand down onto the floor and narrowly missing Natalia's head. He shouted so loudly that his face had done that thing that Alex Ferguson's did when he berated an official. Twinkle was bright red, swelling with rage. He looked as though he was somewhere between having a stroke and doing a massive poo.
Oh, Jack, please.
Every child in the hall shot to the floor, where we remained rooted throughout the rest of the show. Twinkle's performance consisted of a few balloon tricks and a little puppet show, both of which seemed very out of place in a party that had all the atmosphere of a non-alcoholic wake. Any audience interaction had to be asked for several times, so scared were the children of speaking out of turn. For all we knew, an errant "he's behind you" could have resulted in Timmy Twinkle locking you up in his magic box before slinging you into the back of his van, never to be seen again except in grainy images under the headline "Tragic Tot." One trick of his involved him smashing a watch into bits with a hammer. This is when he looked most at home, crashing the hammer down onto the table, showing more fervour with every blow, possibly substituting the watch in his imagination for the dreams he once had, or maybe William's hand. "Who wants to help with my next trick?" he asked, rearranging his comb-over across his sweating forehead and holding the hammer in a clenched fist. Bizarrely, there were no takers. In the home video, if you look beyond the sea of scared 6-year-old faces, you can just about make out my father in the background, turning to a friend of his, no doubt to remark how much he admired Mr. Twinkle's technique. "Twinkle's always had bloody good discipline. You won't hear a word out of them."
Whose voice is that supposed to be? I mean, I don't speak like that.
That's yours. That's
That'd
your
be
voice.
Ridiculous. I mean, I know whose voice it does sound like, but I'm not going to mention that name
Who?
on this. No.
That is your voice. That is how you sound.
Nothing remotely like that.
That is.
Anyway, let's get on with it.
Twinkle's always... How do I write that?
You're a bit more nasal.
Should I squeeze my nose when I do it?
No,
Although I do your
should,
voice quite a lot in this book, so I might pass out.
I think you should just carry on reading, and the voice.
Maybe I could do it in Mrs. James's voice.
The voice for Mr. Twinkle's not right at all either, and you're making him out to be some kind of monster. He was brilliant. He had you all completely under control.
Yeah, I know.
Meant your mother and I could have a day off.
Right, okay.
Anyway.
And so our parents were able to enjoy a pleasant hour in the garden drinking while we were held hostage in the hall by the hammer-wielding master of the dark arts. This is probably why my parties as a child were so well attended. Kids that I barely even knew came. Their parents had heard about Twinkle. I don't know where the Pied Piper of Putney is now, and I daren't find out. But I still worry that if I were to say his name in the mirror 3 times, he might burst through it and choke me to death with a balloon poodle. My father's grip over my birthday celebrations didn't loosen with age. Throughout my early teens, my birthdays would always have to be dinner parties or drinks held at the house so that he could make sure no funny business occurred. On my 16th birthday party, a cigarette butt was found in the flower bed, and he reacted like he'd found a used needle. A witch hunt ensued, and Toby Roper was given a 2-year ban from our house. I was loath to tell anyone that it was, in fact, my cigarette, as I knew I too would have been out on the street. Anyway, it didn't matter that much, because I didn't really get on that well with Toby, and I was happy for him to be the fall guy. That story's obviously made up for the book. I've never smoked a cigarette. But as we approached my 18th birthday, I wanted something a bit more exciting than a dinner party at my mum and dad's house. All my friends were having cool 18ths at nightclubs or bars, and one of my mates had even hired a boat that went up the Thames. I didn't want to be the loser stuck at home still smoking cigarettes behind the shed. "I'm not having my 18th at home," I told my parents. "Well, where then?" asked my father defensively, as though he couldn't even conceive of a birthday venue anywhere other than his garden. "I want to have it at Cuba Club," I told him. Cuba Club was a favourite of mine at the time, a seedy bar in Fulham that was the only place in London where you could get into without ID and then get absolutely obliterated for under a tenner. It was a pretty skanky venue, full of seedy Latino gents who danced very crotchily in the direction of middle-aged Eastern European women as a DJ played Chumbawamba and spoke over every track as though you were at a wedding or a rural fair. Cuba Club is the kind of bar that does deals like buy 2 Jaeger bombs and get the morning after pill for free.
What the hell? What a Jaeger? Jaeger bombs? Are they
We'll
to
have
do
a couple after the recording. Trust me, they're great. If Cuba Club's walls could talk, they would do so on a premium line. It's the kind of place so sticky with DNA that I reckon if you took that light they have on CSI and flashed it over the floor, it would blow the bulb. For horny teenage boys, though, it was a nirvana. "That brothel on the Fulham Road that's full of all those tarty slags," said my father. Yeah, I don't think that's the time-out description, though. My protests were in vain. His foot was being firmly put down. "It's my birthday. I'm not having it at home, and that's final," I said. I was standing my ground on this one, and after much argument, we eventually came to an agreement. I would not have it at Cuba Club, but my parents would have to find a club for me to host my party. Deal. A week later, my dad told me to come into his study to draw up a guest list for the club. Guest list? I thought, wow, Dad, clearly you've pulled it out the bag with this one. Somewhere exclusive, maybe. A West End club. Ooh, nice. Maybe you'd call the people at China White or Whiskey Mist. We'd be partying with celebs, seducing heiresses with urbane conversation over expensive champagne cocktails. Nice. "We need 5 people," said my dad. 5 was a small number, but hey, it's probably because Dad had got us VIP passes. People would be talking about this party for months. "Okay, well, girls-wise," I said, "I want Natalia and Molly."
Molly, incidentally, my beautiful daughter.
Yeah, my sister. Okay, Dad's side. "There are no women allowed in the club, Jack." This was odd, I thought. I mean, most clubs insist on a girl-boy ratio of about 7 to 1. I mean, that's why I invited Natalia and Molly in the first place. Then, it suddenly struck me. My dad hadn't, had he? I mean, it would make sense. Small group, no women, an 18th. It would be amazing, but it just seemed so un-him. "Dad, are you taking us to a strip club?" "Don't be ridiculous. Of course we're not going to a bloody lap club. What do you take me for?" Well, I took him for a lot of things, but not the kind of man who takes his son to Stringfellows. "I was going to try to keep it a surprise, but if you must know, we're going to one of the most exclusive members' clubs in London." "Oh, wow. What, Groucho? Soho House?" "My club. The Garrick Club." What the fuck? The Garrick Club. Founded in 1831. Its patron is the Duke of Edinburgh, a man my father admires above all others. My father himself has been a member since 1979. The club is situated in Garrick Street in a large Georgian building.
Victorian, actually.
Whatever. Georgian building, early Victorian building, and boasts a membership largely drawn from politics, literary types, and theatricals. There's a pretty broad range of ages, running from a handful of young Turks knocking on the door of about 50 to anywhere around the 100 mark.
Look, I'm not going to sit here while you slag off the Garrick Club and get it all wrong. I mean, this is ridiculous.
The members are really old.
Absolutely. They are not. We've got a huge number of young members. You
like
know.
who?
Hugh Bonneville.
Hugh Bonneville.
Robert Lindsay. Simon Russell Beale. I mean,
okay.
a long list of young men.
All right, okay. So it does have some young members like whippersnapper Simon Russell Beale. Can I go on?
Yeah.
The girl-to-boy ratio, the all-important factor at an 18th, was less broad. Not that women were bad. I assume there are some female chefs, for instance, and maybe the odd lady cleaner. But for any other woman to cross the threshold used to require a very special occasion indeed. And even then, they were made to walk up a back staircase. The Garrick Club also made no exceptions. My father once bumped into the Queen Mother, someone he admired nearly as much as the Duke of Edinburgh, coming up the back stairs, presumably on her way to rendezvous with her bookie. The rules have relaxed somewhat in recent years, but even now, it is certainly not a club you'd visit to pick up girls. I think the phrase is sausage fest.
What on earth is a sausage fest? The Garrick Club's pork and Stilton sausages are some of the finest that I have ever tasted, And they do a very, very mean toad in the hole too, as you well know.
Yeah, that's what Sausage Fest means. It means they serve really good sausages.
Right, okay.
I was being nice. It was a compliment, saying the Garrick Club is a sausage fest.
Just sounds... Well,
it's not.
Carry on.
It's just about their cuisine. My father once told me a story regarding the membership book at the Garrick, which is kept in the members-only salon privé. When someone applies to become a member, their name is put in the book, and other members have to sign their names next to them, and 5 or so years later, they get elected. Although, from time to time, a name can be blackballed. On one occasion, the politician Quentin Davis, who was notorious for having crossed the floor of the House of Commons from the Conservative to the Labour benches, wanted to join the Garrick.
As you know, Jack, I've never been a big fan of MPs who do this. Do you remember Sir Hartley Shawcross?
Weirdly, no.
Who changed parties and was appropriately nicknamed Sir Shortly Floorcross.
Sorry, didn't Winston Churchill change parties?
That's different.
Twice?
It's got nothing to do with it.
So you're saying you don't like Winston Churchill?
I'm not. I don't want to talk about Winston Churchill. He's in a sort of completely different league to the sort of people that we're talking about now. So let's just leave him out of it and carry on.
Okay. Shortly after Quentin Davis's name appeared in the members' book, someone wrote in thick black pen across the entire page, "You must be joking." His application was withdrawn a day later. My godfather Nigel, also a member, told me that "You must be joking" was written in italic handwriting that looked suspiciously like my father's. He denies it.
Categorically. And incidentally, you've mentioned Nigel Havers. There's another young member of the club.
How old's Nigel?
Just carry on reading.
I thought you wouldn't reveal that. Don't get me wrong. The Garrick is a beautiful place. It houses an impressive collection of fine paintings and boasts the best wine cellar in London. In the loos there are combs floating in jars of greenish pomade like rare preserved fish or Napoleon Bonaparte's cock.
Oh.
But if you shone that light from CSI around it, the worst you'd discover is the corpse of one of its older members. It is, therefore, less than ideal for an 18th birthday party, especially if, like me, you had been hoping for a little bit of birthday sex. The best I'd get at the Garrick Club was a bit of birthday sexism. As the 4 of my friends, whom my father had deemed worthy to come to the Garrick, arrived, they were surprised to discover that there were no queues outside, no young girls in mini-dresses, no roped-off smoking area, no viciously slow-witted, knuckle-dragging bouncer, not even a sexy door whore with a clipboard. Just the hall porter in his green suit and tie. "We're meeting my father, Michael Whitehall," I said. "Not dressed like that, you aren't," he replied. We were all in smart shirts and proper shoes, but as he pointed out, no one is allowed into the Garrick Club without a jacket and tie. Lucky for us, he had some in the cloakroom. "I'll go downstairs and see what we have. You lads wait here." My impeccably coordinated birthday outfit was ruined somewhat by the jacket that he returned with. A thick, dark corduroy number that was far too big for me and still had dandruff on the shoulders from its previous occupier, who possibly could have been that corpse the CSI guys discovered. Anyway, I looked ridiculous.
Jack, this slagging off the Garrick Club, you're only doing this, and I've suddenly realised where this is all coming from, is because you know that if you applied to be a member, you'd be blackballed. I mean, the only club you were able to get into was the Groucho Club, but that's a very, very different kettle of fish.
I wouldn't be blackballed from the Garrick if I applied. Nigel would not blackball me.
Well,
He'd
let's
get me
just
in.
carry on.
Not that I want to be in it. We went into the club to meet my father, who was already drinking with 2 other members at the bar. If I remember correctly, they were discussing the Crimean War as we arrived, one of my dad's drinking buddies being the last surviving participant.
If this were true, he would be at least 175, so a very likely story.
My mates looked very unimpressed. I told them that as we were going out in the West End, we'd probably bump into a celeb or 2. But at least this was the only element of the evening that, technically, I didn't let them down on. Sure, the celebrity in question may not have been the footballer or glamour model my mates were expecting, but he was a celebrity nonetheless. "Chaps, meet Peter Sallis," my father said, indicating the younger man next to the war vet. "Though obviously a few of you might have already realised who he is." The look of "who the fuck is this guy" on my mates' faces was crystal clear, but my father misinterpreted it as star-struck awe, assuming that my 18-year-old friends were last of the summer wine aficionados, and that when he said good evening to them, they would surely recognise him as the voice of Wallace and Gromit.
Your failure to recognise Peter Sallis is a failure on your part, and certainly not Peter's. Peter's not only a very recognisable actor, but also a very distinguished one. If you want to learn about real television acting, and not the sort of stuff you do, watch Peter in the Flaxborough Chronicles or the Pallisers, two brilliant programmes of the mid-70s. If you were to have half the career that Peter Sallis has had, and so far I've seen very little evidence that you will, your mother and I would be so proud of you. That's Peter Sallis.
Okay, yes. Leaving Peter at the bar, we sat down in the main dining room and were treated to a set menu my father had arranged. The Garrick Club kitchen is very much aimed at pleasing the older palate. It's a red meat and red wine affair, with no piri-piri chicken in sight. Our main course, for instance, was liver and bacon. Offal is not a very popular dish among the youth of today.
Well, their loss. Offal is delicious.
My friend Freddie had prepared a short toast to make for me. He stood up, but just as he clinked his glass and cleared his throat, a Whitehead member, as though there were any other, looked over from the main table in the middle of the room and barked to him to sit down and please be quiet. Thus, in that moment, my birthday parties had come full circle. Even aged 18, my father had found a way of taking us to the only place where he could find the spirit of Timmy Twinkle. I mean, for all I know, the old man in the Garrick Club that day was Timmy Twinkle, although I suspect Timmy is now in prison, or alternatively on the run in Argentina, wanted for lashing out at a child for snotting on his cape. Most people end up having some sort of story from their 18th. Maybe they got off with the girl they'd always fancied at school, but they were too afraid to talk to. Others maybe got so drunk that they had to have their stomachs pumped. But for me, the most exciting thing that happened on the night that I turned 18 was that when I went to the loo, I took a piss next to the Bishop of London. "Well, you can tick that off your bucket list," my father said when I told him.